we should say that's the top secret stuff. That.
It's great to be working with Feathers again. He's an amazing character. He's a very, very simple shape, but in lighting him, I want to bring out that inner darkness.
The ultimate challenge is that he's very still, and his strength comes from his stillness. In fact, he hardly ever blinks, and when he does move, you see it.
The way you could have him step into a room and stare just with a blink or two, and you just kind of let the camera move do the work and let the music do the work.
Even within our team of really great animators, there's only a handful who have sort of done the killer shots.
I've always kept the lighting very simple on Feathers, but quite a bit of backlight, and just enough light to catch that little glint in his eyes. We thought when we started filming him we would have to maybe post some of that in there, but in fact with careful placement of light, he does actually just pick up, and you actually suspect that he's thinking evil thoughts in there.
Animators want to move things, and they actually, if they move him as little as possible, that sort of seems to be the secret behind getting Feathers to be powerful.
I remember just discovering the power of that simplicity Merlin's talking about in The Wrong Trousers. Steve Box was mostly responsible for Feathers McGraw.
In Nick's original film with Feathers, if you look too closely, he changes shape quite a lot from one shot to the next. But we've had to try and keep an element of that in, but also be much more controlled. When you've got a bigger studio floor and a lot of animators, it's really important that although we have a number of puppets, that they all look the same.
First of all, it is a clay figure.
Yeah.
It's all hand.
It's like that kind of size.
And it's very small, which makes it even more difficult.
If you have any slight difference between the gap between the eyes or the gap between the eyes and the beak, so it's very crucial that the eyes are exactly the right size. But we've used glass pins. We had to buy a box of about 100 and then go and measure each one. The ones that were too big and too small, we had to reject them so that we had only the pins that were exactly the right size.
When he first appears, we really wanted that sort of film noirish thing there. We actually see him with all the prison bars sort of projected in the background, the shadows. And even the angle we shot it on there is sort of a Dutch angle, so it puts you slightly ill at ease, and then he steps into the light.
I was just watching The Godfather recently again, and just how Marlon Brando, created that character. And it's just the way he's actually quite minimal, actually, but has such power.
Yeah, Mrs. Danvers as well.
Yeah, Mrs. Danvers in Rebecca, yeah.
As with any Wallace and Gromit film, I mean, it's a joy for cinematographers because we genre hop. Because you can do that in the Wallace and Gromit world. It allows that sort of scope, from high-key comedy in the beautiful garden to the dark subterranean mind of the penguin. So we go into film noir. We sort of strike into hammer horror, science fiction films, and our influence is everything from Hitchcock to Tom and Jerry. We'll call on anything to tell that story.
We do try to keep things logged, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Will, our head of animation, is kind of always noting stuff.
Yeah, so there is sort of a huge document that about the characters, about sort of do's and don'ts about the physicality, about their performance, about notes we've given as we've developed the film, says that all the different animators who work on different characters have a point of reference.
Right at the beginning of the film, I was quite keen to know from Nick and Merlin what Wallace they wanted, because actually he's been in a lot of films now, and he does evolve, as you can see, through the different productions. The Loaf and Death was the most recent one, but actually Were Rabbit's the Wallace that we wanted. He's a slightly more contained character, like his brow and his mouth. Everything got a bit bigger for Loaf and Death, and so on this film we wanted to bring it back in a little bit, because the thing is, you get more if it's less extreme in a funny sort of way.
On Curse of the Were Rabbit, I remember we did master classes. I remember stood in front of the whole class of animators drawing Gromit, and everyone trying to copy it, and then we'd have modelling classes as well, and then animation, everyone trying to get Gromit's brow right. You don't realise that till you have your big team doing it, that there's many ways you can interpret how to do Gromit.
So this really just talks about all the different parts of the puppet and how we can take what's essentially a piece of clay that's come out of a mould and turn it into our character. And it involves details that, you know, only the animation team can really understand because they spend all their time moving the clay around on their face.
So these are ball and socket joints, and it's basically a ball that's clamped with a bolt, and that you can tension that, tighten it so that this can just be moved at exactly the right amount. Gromit he's got dog mode where he's in his all fours. This is a seated one, so you get nice good sculpt on the bottom, and then we've got squatting ones. We do have a standing one as well, which I haven't got an example of here. We've got Wallace, who is in his traditional outfit here, and then we've got Wallace in his onesie that Norbot's knitted him, and in his coat he's got silicone arms, and he does have clay hands or silicone hands. So when we have a clay hand, it just has a little paddle in it, and then when we've got a silicone hand, it'll have it'll have wires in the fingers so they can bend.
This was always really painful for the animation team, to be sculpting the shapes of his shirt sleeves, and it's the kind of thing that we'd spend quite a long time on, but no one would really be looking at. You have to just spend time to make it look good. So now they're actually made of silicone, but they look like clay because they're sculpted and they're moulded. So it's the best of both worlds for us.
When we cast the silicone and we paint it, sometimes it comes out a little bit shiny. So we've sprayed it and it's just started to tack and go slightly cured. We then spray it with icing sugar to give it a nice matte finish. And when when it's all cured, we wash the icing sugar off, and that gives us a lovely matte finish. Here you've got really nice bits of artwork that you can just see to give him just a level of dirtiness to his coat.
This is a head that's just come out of a mould, and I'm then going to apply some of the clay and move it around and push it out a bit to make it into Wallace. But we do need certain tools, and generally we use wooden tools because the clay works better with the wood. And on this film, Merlin has sculpted a bespoke tool for everyone to use. It's a little gift that he's giving at the end of the film, but that's the one that I've got, and I do rather like it. When we're changing the mouth sets, we need to blend that line in, and a tool like this is really useful sometimes just to get into the nooks and crannies. This is a time lapse of one of the animators working on a shot. This is Maria, and she's animating the Norbots coming out of the van. And you'll see that all of them have a sort of metal scaffold to hold them in space. But we're also tracking along the road at the same time. And that's Maria. And you can see the whole camera is moving. The camera's here, filming. The van is attached to the camera with scaffolding. And everything, including Maria, has to move along with it. And you can see how many days it took her based on the different outfits she's wearing.
We use a technique called, we call it laving, which is LAV, which just means live action video. And I'm not sure if other companies really do this, but it's something we've kind of grown up with.
Seem to have done it forever.
Yeah, and it's we basically act out the scene. It's a way of us briefing the animators to exactly what's in our heads.
So he's just getting into the role here. He's panicking, and then he's intrigued. Oh, what is it? So that's the bit of performance, and then he'll do Wallace as well. This is Wallace. So what we tend to do in the live action unit, we'll have the actual audio from the shot. So quite often that's the voice actor. It's been recorded probably a month, 2 months, 3 months before. That recording will have been selected by the directors, and then in this unit we'll basically sync along to it. We'll sort of roughly match the dialogue. So,
oh, I've got something for Melvin.
And obviously you get quite a lot of character from that. You get also where he's looking when. But we're really conscious not to copy that frame by frame, because the thing about animation is it isn't real life. We're not trying to make it really naturalistic. We're trying to get the essence of the character.
There's footage of us acting out the entire film, actually. You could actually make the entire film as us being Wallace and Gromit and all the other Feathers, McGraw, whatever.
The characters without dialogue, so Gromit and Feathers, they're the ones that are really challenging. And with Feathers, it's about finding what is the minimum you can communicate what you need to.
So that we can actually animate, we have to act it all ourselves. So Wallace will be like, oh, I've got an idea. But generally speaking, Wallace is very simple in terms of the way he thinks. He's quite bright-eyed, and he literally looks around the place. Because of that, we keep lots of energy, and we're not doing lots of really smooth, subtle movements. We do quite big movements. Gromit, however, is a real thinker, and so with him, it's much more about getting inside his head. And often we'll spend ages just looking at the eyes and how do you convey when you're thinking about something slightly sad, and we'll sort of figure out where his eyes should be and how long they should stay there before they sort of flit across or something. But there are some shots that are extreme close-ups where we're just looking at this much of Gromit's expression, and that's where it gets really, really, really fine. We've got tiny pinholes in the eyes, so all the animators have tools effectively with a pin on the end, and we can go in and make the tiny movements required.
It was very obviously tragic to lose the wonderful Peter Sallis, and what amazing humour and charm he brought to Wallace. It was a great challenge to us because it's so hard to step into his shoes, obviously, but we're also very blessed to have already met Ben Whitehead.
He knew and worked with Peter since Were Rabbit, and he's really understudied Peter from Were Rabbit onwards, and finding Ben was a great happy accident.
We needed someone to stand in as a reading artist with, I think it was Helena Bonham Carter as Lady Tottington or Ray Fiennes, and he stepped in, and then we realised he can do a great Wallace mimic. And that's how it all started, really.
Over the years, he's taken roles that either Peter couldn't or didn't want to do on various other projects that haven't been the headline films. And actually, for us, we've been working with Ben for years and years and years, so it doesn't feel like a new relationship to us. But we're very aware that to the outside world, it is. So we feel very comfortable and delighted that Ben is doing such a great job with taking on what Peter set such a great bar, performance-wise.
What's changed since A Grand Day Out? Oh, well, you could say almost everything, really.
You're older for a start.
Yeah, I'm older. Merlin is still the same age as
I'm getting younger.
Came on Close Shave. Yeah. We've gone digital with the equipment and digital cameras and use of visual effects and everything like that. But even though the characters have evolved in their design in many ways, we still find it important to stick to the handmade, models.
These are all the parts to make up a Norbot. The arms and the legs and the hands and the hat and the head and all these pieces that go in the head, the cheeks and the jaw and the lips and the eyelids and the beards. And we've used some 3D printed pieces for the coring in there and for the head as well.
When I first started working on it with Nick and Merlin, our main concern was Norbot and how complex he might be, because he's a robot gnome and there's an army of them. So they're sculpted by hand originally and then turned into a computer version. We ended up finding many economies that we could do with shooting these vast scenes of Norbots. So I think you might think there are a lot more Norbots in the film than there really are.
Digitally, it's a lot more flexible. I say just the ability to see exactly what's going on the screen actually helps. But also instantaneously, you can actually see something, look at it, get directors to approve it, and move on to the next thing. Back in the day, you were always holding to waiting for the stuff to come back from the labs the next day.
I suppose now, because there's more and more sort of LED lights, the studio is actually a bit cooler. And that helps us because the clay doesn't get as hot. So where we used to struggle with sculpting, because it was getting hotter and hotter under these huge film lights, it's now much cooler. We had very loud, not very effective fans that would blow on us, but they'd also blow on the puppets. We've tried fridges. Sometimes we had the fridge in the unit and we could take the puppets, put them in the fridge, let them cool a bit and then get them back out. We've got the opposite problem now, so we actually have little ovens around the place that we warm the modelling clay in the oven sometimes to just soften it a bit. And some of the animators have hair dryers to warm the clay, but I don't need a hairdryer.
The glorious thing of this film, we're trying to keep to the roots of the Wallace and Gromit films, going back to Wrong Trousers, is trying to keep as much as we can in camera as possible. So what you're actually seeing is actually what's on the set. But of course we move with the times all the while, and we're just pulling in some really good special effects in there. There's water effects which we're adding to it, being very, very careful to actually marry the two things together.
With animation, you only really get one go on the studio floor, so everything has to be established and worked out right from the beginning. This was the embryonic stage of it. In the end, we felt it was a lot easier, had a lot more control. We made a full-scale section of aqueduct. And because we made a full-scale section, it actually worked out quite well because CG needed to put water in the aqueduct. And actually, the more they can do anything that interacts with the water, the aqueduct itself we've decided to actually build as a CG aqueduct, and they've used all our textures from the pieces that we've made of the aqueduct, and they will be bridging this ravine in CGI.
So it's quite important to me that we're able to offer up what we're calling a virtual set, where when we move the camera they can see where the aqueduct is going to be. So we set up with Unreal Engine. We've created a version of the aqueduct which is based on the model that we'll actually use. Here we get a good idea of what the final image will look like way before we get into the post. So this allows the directors to see their vision and make sure that they're going to get what they really want to get.
I think one of the largest things as well is it's gone from you creating Wallace and Gromit and finding out who they are, to each film the crews get bigger and bigger, and you know, we've got such a colossal crew of talented people on this film.
Audiences love Wallace and Gromit for the same reason we do. We believe in them. We believe in their world. It's a special place where anything can happen. And, we created that, and I think people love that. Although the heart of it is, of course, it's friendship. It's love and friendship.
The favourite part working in a stop-motion animation film, the end probably, when we've done it. It's a long journey.
Like live action, but miniature. It's, you know, we've got models and sets, and it can be lit in really creative ways, atmospheric ways, and it's like it's a performance in real space.
That's right. It never gets old seeing a character that is just a puppet coming to life and being a living, breathing, independent being up on the screen. And there's something still very magic about what the animators can do and how they make you feel about what you're seeing on the screen.
Animating is art, man.